Welcome everyone of this shutdown, and that's quite simply in the hands Welcome everyone to day 8 of the Democrat shutdown. As is our custom now, we'll come out every morning and give you an update on where things stand. I've tried to make this as simple as possible and as digestible as possible. It seems complicated, what's happening in Washington right now. It actually is very simple. Don't let the Democrats distract you and try to convince you of things that are not true. Yesterday, or a couple of days ago, Monday, I laid out 6 simple truths about how the Democrats shut down the government, why they did it, and why it is so important for them to come to their senses and turn the lights on. Yesterday, I went through 5 fast facts for you about the shutdown, and I explained, as everyone now knows, Chuck Schumer's desperate attempts to rehabilitate his own image by shutting down the government. Today, we're going to talk about some of the consequences of that shutdown and what it means to real people around this country, real Americans experiencing the devastating cost of their political antics here. And I'm going to read you some sample quotes and headlines that we just collected yesterday from around the country. Here's a headline from The Hill. GOP leaders point to Capitol Police missed paychecks as shutdown drags on. So today, the U.S. Capitol Police officers are going to come to work to bravely protect U.S. government officials and staff in these dangerous times. They're going to do that without pay. Many Democrats in this chamber, by the way, I want to note, are going to receive paychecks this month while the men and women of the U.S. Capitol Police who are protecting them will not. Here's another headline from the New York Post. Aviation groups warn a government shutdown will delay aircraft safety inspections, maintenance work on critical equipment. While air traffic controllers are going to continue to serve in their posts, thankfully, critical safety inspections are going to stop, increasing risk for air travelers. That affects everybody. Here's another headline from Georgia, local media in Georgia. Central Georgia food banks prepare for surge of new clients during the government shutdown. It's a sad headline. Remember, Georgia's 2 Democrat senators, Warnock and Ossoff, have now voted 5 times to keep the government closed down. 5 times so far. I suspect they may continue, and they're hurting real people in the state of Georgia. Here's one from New Hampshire local media. National parks caught in the crosshairs of government shutdown. Let me point out that both senators from New Hampshire, Senators Shaheen and Hassan, have repeatedly voted to keep the government closed, and New Hampshire's national park sites closed by extension. How about New Jersey? Here's a headline yesterday. Hospital at-home telehealth programs on hold amid government shutdown. You got 2 Democrat senators in New Jersey, Andy Kim and Cory Booker, and they have repeatedly voted against funding these programs, which New Jerseyans rely upon daily. Here's one from Michigan. Michigan nonprofit leaders said a shutdown would be at best disruptive and at worst potentially devastating for local communities. There are 2 Democrat senators in Michigan, Gary Peters and Alyssa Slotkin, and they have voted now 5 times to enable this devastation upon their communities. One more, I could do this all day. Here's one more from CBS News. Government shutdown fears have Colorado food banks bracing for potential new visitors. You guessed it, 2 Democrat senators from Colorado, Michael Bennet and John Hickenlooper. They keep voting over and over to keep the government closed. Democrats claim they want to negotiate, but that is already happening in a bipartisan, bicameral fashion. And we brought in the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee this morning, Tom Cole, who can talk more about that. But I just want to say this as I yield to Mr. Cole, and then you'll hear from the rest of the leaders, and I'll take some questions. There is one sad and inescapable fact that no one can forget here. This shutdown is nothing more than political cover for Chuck Schumer and the Democrats. They are worried about the Marxist flanked in their Democrat Party. The Marxists are about to elect a mayor in New York City. That's Chuck Schumer's state, and he's terrified that he's going to get a challenge from his far left. I've noted that Chuck Schumer is a very far left politician, but he's not far enough left for the communists, and they're coming for him. And so he has to put up his dukes and show a fight. So they picked a fight on something that's not even related at all to the shutdown and the funding that we should have gotten done by the end of September. We just need a stopgap measure to give us a little more time to get the job of Congress done. They refuse to do it because they're playing politics, and real Americans are paying the price for it. But let me introduce Chairman Cole, and he can tell you about some of these discussions that have been going on. Mr. Cole?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Usually when I follow the Speaker, I usually think I should just say what he said and excuse myself right away. But in this case, it is pretty easy. I mean, we've had a pretty decent year in the House Appropriations Committee, all 12 bills out of committee before September 30th. 3 that we are in negotiations on with the Democrats. Those negotiations have gone very well. We're prepared pretty quickly to close once the government's reopened. We could get at least 3 bills done. The President could sign them in. Those things would be immune from a shutdown until the following September 30th. Then we'd pick another group of 3 or 4 bills, and then we would do in cooperation with our Democratic colleagues and start working on that. So the process, honestly, was moving along pretty well, and then we had unrelated demands, obviously related to repealing work the Congress had already done on Medicaid, and then these new discussions on subsidies. And I do want to point out, at least the bill we have right now in front of us doesn't even go till December 31st. I mean, these actions would still, we could do this work and still have time to turn around, as the President and our leadership has pointed out in both chambers, and sit down and talk about these other issues. But it's hard to do much when the negotiations aren't happening simply because the government is shut down. So again, we're prepared to work. I've got very talented counterparts on the Democratic side. They're good negotiators. We've negotiated a lot of labor issue bills together between Patty Murray, Rosa DeLauro, and myself, and obviously Susan Collins is one of the best legislators in the building. So it's not like we were going to have a hard time, I think, finding common ground, but you do have to restore the government for that to happen. Democrats are not likely to move bills while they've got the government shut down, because it suggests that absent that, we would be moving through the process as normal, and frankly, in a much better shape than we've been in recent years. So again, I'm just hopeful that my colleagues in the Senate, and it's worth pointing out, a majority of the Senate's already on our side, a bipartisan majority of 55. So this really does get down to Leader Schumer and the bulk of his caucus just simply shutting down the government over items unrelated to what we normally do in appropriations. I've mentioned this to both the Speaker and the Leader because they make these decisions, but you know, we should not be handling Medicaid on my committee. We should not be handling the Obamacare subsidies simply because we don't have the expertise or the jurisdiction to do either one of those things. What we can do is move the bills through the process, make sure that every soldier is paid, make sure that every air traffic controller is paid, make sure that the American people don't lose any services. So we're prepared to do that. Frankly, I think my Democratic colleagues are prepared to do that once we resolve this shutdown, and that's quite simply in the hands of Leader Schumer and the bulk of his caucus. When they make the mind that they want the government up and running, believe me, we'll move very quickly, and we'll try to move away quickly from a CR status to passing bills individually or in small groups, and get folks up and working again, and get the government restored and continue that process as we're supposed to do. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I just yield back.
Well, appreciate the work that Chairman Cole and the Appropriations Committee have done months and months ago to get us in a place where we would be ready to have all of the appropriations in a place where you can negotiate those differences. It was Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries who chose to take their toys and go home, all to appease the most radical elements of the far left, because Chuck Schumer is more concerned about his political job than he is about the jobs of millions of American families. American families' lives are at stake here. Whether or not we're going to be able to pay our troops, whether or not people can get on an airplane and go visit a relative or take a vacation, whatever their plans may have been, are being disrupted. Real lives of real people are being disrupted so that Chuck Schumer can show the far left Marxist in his party that is having some kind of tantrum and fighting Donald Trump because he's afraid of the far left part of his political base. A lot of people say, what is this really about? And obviously you see Democrats trying to make it about things that have nothing to do with the basic funding of government, the bill that we passed here in this House just a few weeks ago. And in fact, a lot of Democrats are having buyer's remorse, but every one of us has a voting card. And weeks ago, Republicans and Democrats in the House had an opportunity to put this voting card in the machine and tell the American people where they stand on a government shutdown. And 99% of House Republicans voted yes to keep the government open while we negotiate our differences. And 99% of Democrats voted no to shut the government down. Some of them are having buyer's remorse, and I don't blame them. They're now realizing the dire consequences that their no vote caused to real families across America. Some of them are begging the Speaker, please bring us back in so they can get another shot at this. But you don't get a do-over. They picked the wrong side. They voted to shut the government down. They failed the test. But the good news is they can get bailed out by the Senate. If they really want to solve these problems, if they really want to make sure our troops get paid, which, by the way, we voted for, they voted against, they can call their 2 Democrat senators who have 5 times voted to shut the government down and say, today's the day you can make amends. Today's the day you can open the government up. We only need 4 more votes. It's not a large number. 4 Democrat senators have come to their senses and said, yes, let's open up the government and not have this charade continue, but it takes 4 more because Chuck Schumer wants to have a tantrum. Well, let me tell you what another senator just said yesterday about why this shutdown is going on. He said, quote, this is a Democrat senator yesterday, the point of this shutdown is not just suffering for suffering's sake, but to make a point. So you even have Democrat senators admitting that they're imposing suffering on the American people, but they just want to make a point? My God, millions of lives are at stake. They know they're inflicting suffering on the American people so they can make some kind of point. If you want to have a tantrum, this is not the 3rd grade. This is the lives of American people. Real lives are at stake. Real careers and families. Will they be able to pay their house note come the 15th? That's at stake, the safety of our air traffic control system, so that some senator that wants to have a tantrum can make a point. I think the American people are getting sick of this charade that's going on. They know what the Democrats in the House did to shut the government down, but they also know that just 4 senators doing the right thing can turn this around and open the government back up again. And yes, we have big differences on a lot of things that we need to be negotiating on. All those bills that Chairman Cole and his appropriators sent out of committee, you can't have those negotiations while you're in a shutdown. And they know that, but they don't mind inflicting suffering on the American people because they want to make a point. I think the American people are going to start making points. People could pick up the phone and call their Democrat senator. We did a press call yesterday in the states of Georgia and Maryland, where all 4 senators there could literally end this today, but they've all been 5 times voting no on the bill to get the government back open. It was ironic. The Maryland delegation of Democrats held a press conference just days ago talking about how bad a shutdown will be for the state of Maryland. And they're right. The irony is they're the ones who voted to shut it down. Over 150 employees in the state of Maryland alone will be hurt, and their own Democrat delegation is saying how bad it's going to be, yet they're the ones who voted to inflict that, quote, suffering on the people of Maryland. This madness can end. This madness needs to end with sanity finally emerging. Bring some common sense in. And Chuck Schumer, if you can't do the right thing because you're so afraid of your political job, think about the jobs of millions of families out there who don't want to have that suffering inflicted on them. And let 4 other of your Senate Democrat colleagues do the right thing for you. Let's end this. Our whip. Tom Emmer.
Eight days. We are now 8 days into the Democrats' shutdown. 8 days that our troops are not getting paid. Border Patrol agents are going without mission-critical funding. Federal workers are being forced to figure out how they're going to put food on the table for their families. All because Democrats would rather hold the American people hostage to appease their radical base than to pass our clean, nonpartisan government funding bill. As of this morning, Senate Democrats have had 5 opportunities to get the government up and running again for the people they were elected to serve. And the vast majority of them have voted no every single time. Their obstruction is not only a slap in the face to hard-working Americans whose livelihoods are being put at risk due to the Democrats' shutdown, it's also a slap in the face to the constituents who fund their salaries with the expectation that they fulfill their basic constitutional responsibilities. In my hand, I have more than a dozen pages of organizations from across the country representing Americans from every end of the political spectrum echoing the exact same message. And that message is that government shutdowns solves nothing and hurts everyone. So to our Democrat colleagues in the Senate, enough with the political grandstanding. Do the right and responsible thing by passing the House's clean CR immediately. Americans are already hurting. People's jobs are at stake. You can and must end the political games and reopen the government today. And with that, I turn it over to our conference chair, Lisa McClain.
Good morning, everybody. Again and again, Democrats have chosen to put illegal aliens over hardworking Americans. That is not my opinion. That is fact. Read the bill. Democrats let millions of illegals pour in across our border under Joe Biden. Democrats gave them driver's license. Democrats allowed them to cast ballots in elections. And now Democrats are fighting, they are fighting to give illegals health care on your dime. Democrats want to take money out of your pockets and give them to illegal aliens so they can get government benefits. These aren't my opinions. These are actual facts. Go to the website and read the facts, right? But what Democrats do when they have no plan, no vision, and no leader, they have to misrepresent the truth. And they do that over and over again, and they think you, the American people, aren't going to notice. They're not going to notice. You're not going to notice that they're taking money out of your pockets and giving them to illegals. They're going to try and put their spin on it. But I challenge you, go to the website and read it for yourself. When Democrats have the choice between standing up for American people or catering to the illegal aliens, what do? They choose illegals every single time. time and time again. And that's exactly what they're doing again in this government shutdown fight. Democrats are putting illegals above American citizens. So I ask the Democrats, how long will it take you to put Americans first in this funding fight? I ask our senators, Senator Peters and Slotkin, when are you going to put the American people first? The people that elected you to represent them. How many times will you vote against our troops? I ask Senator Peters and Senator Slotkin, how many times are you going to vote not to pay our troops? How many times will you vote against moms and babies who rely on WIC? Against flood insurance? How many times will you vote to put illegals first and Americans last? The answer to that question is as long as the radical base keeps calling the shots. My two senators are pandering to their radical base as well. Republicans, however, are actually putting Americans first every single day. And why? Because that's our job. That's our duty. And quite frankly, that is our responsibility. And I call on the Democrats, especially the two Democrats from my state, Senator Peters and Senator Slotkin, please put the American people who you represent first.
We'll take a few questions. Yes, ma'am.
Speaker Johnson, thank you. Do you agree that the mayor of Chicago and the governor of Illinois should be in prison?
Should they be in prison? Should the mayor of Chicago and the governor of Illinois be in prison? I'm not the attorney general. I'm the Speaker of the House, and I'm trying to manage the chaos here. I'm not following the day-to-day on that. I do know that they've resisted the introduction of, or the offering of National Guard troops in Chicago, which is a terribly dangerous city and has been destroyed in the process of being destroyed under liberal Democrat governance and their terrible policies. I would just cite for you in response Exhibit A, which is the District of Columbia. All of you were able to walk safely into the Capitol today, and you can park your cars blocks away and walk back to your cars, and you're not in fear of having your purse snatched or your car being jacked or being assaulted. And why is that? Because President Trump had enough of it. He's a strong leader in the Oval Office, and he used the resources that were available to him, the National Guard, to bring order to the chaos. The Democrat mayor of the District of Columbia ultimately said, thank you so much for the reinforcements, and you're all enjoying the spoils of good policy and a return to the rule of law. If we could do that in the other major cities in the country where they're having terrible crime crises, that should be seen as a positive, and I think most Americans see it that way. If you're a resident of Chicago or New Orleans or one of these other Democrat-run cities, you've had enough. You're tired of your family walking in fear and not being able to enjoy their lives, and if President Trump can use the resources and do it in a lawful manner to allow National Guard troops to help bring order and restore the rule of law, that is something that is wildly popular with the American people. Now, if you have elected officials in some of these states who are committed to their radical, soft-on-crime ideology and defunding the police and all the things the Democrat Party championed for the last several years, and they want to stand by that, we encourage them to do so. We'll see what the people think about it. Yes, sir. Back row.
Speaker Johnson, a lot of the free health care for illegal aliens that you've been talking about is care provided in emergency rooms, which are required by federal law to care for anybody, even if they can't pay, even if they're not a citizen. Do you think that that law should be changed?
No. You're talking about EMTALA, which has been part of the law for most of my life. Emergency care is provided without question to anyone who comes in. If you're hemorrhaging and you show up in an emergency room, you get treated. That's something we all support. That's a very good law. We're in favor of it. You're cherry-picking a tiny subset of the issues. We put, and go to it's still on the website, speaker.gov, look at page 57, section 2141 of Chuck Schumer's counter-proposal CR that he filed. There's 6 categories of things that they would like to restore funding to, and it adds up to $192.8 billion, almost $200 billion of hardworking taxpayer funds that would go to support illegal aliens and other non-citizens. Now, with regard to EMTALA, are we saying change the law? No. But one of the things they're doing, and one of the things that Chuck Schumer is advocating for and has filed in the law and is using as a leverage point to keep the government shut down is he literally wants to reimburse hospitals more money for treating illegal aliens than American citizens. Fact. Go look it up. Go look on the website. Don't take my word for it. We're not doing that. If you're a young, pregnant American citizen woman who shows up in an ER and you get treated and they pay the hospital less for treating you than some illegal rabble-rouser who came in from some, South American country to do us harm, that is wrong. The Republican Party stands for common sense. In the big, beautiful bill, we fix that. And Chuck Schumer wants to unwind it, and it is unconscionable to me that he's inflicting all this pain on American citizens so they can play games and try to appease the radical left base. That's what this is. Back, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 questions about federal worker pay. One, is it your understanding that federal workers will be repaid after this shutdown as part of current law? And 2, would you allow a UC, for example, for the military to ensure that they would be paid in the shutdown?
Those are 2 questions. Federal workers, it's my understanding that the law is that they would be paid. There is some other legal analysis that's floating around. I have yet had time to dig into and read that. But it has always been the case, that is tradition, and I think it is statutory law that federal employees be paid, and that's my position. I think they should be. They should not be subjected to harm and financial dire straits because Chuck Schumer wants to play political games. With regard to paying the troops, I want everybody to listen to me very carefully. Hakeem Jeffries and the House Democrats, as Leader Scalise said so well, are clamoring to get back here and have another vote because some of them want to get on record and say they're for paying the troops. We already had that vote. It's called the CR. Every Republican and at least one Democrat had the common sense to say, of course we want the government to stay in operation. Of course we want to pay our troops and our air traffic controllers and our Border Patrol agents, TSA, and everybody else. We did have that vote. The House, I keep saying the House did its job. We did that almost 3 weeks ago. And every Democrat in the House except one voted against it. They voted that they did not want the troops to be paid. They did not want TSA agents to be paid. They did not want air traffic controllers, Border Patrol agents, and all the rest. They live with that vote. They made that decision. The House is done. The ball is now in the Senate's court. It does us no good to be here dithering on show votes. We did it. We sent the product over. It is clean. It is 24 pages in length. It's the most bare minimum that's necessary to keep the lights on for the people. And Chuck Schumer and 43 of his colleagues, Democrats, continue to do the wrong thing. We're not having it. Yes, ma'am.
Democrats continue to allege that the Republican-controlled Senate can change the rules to push through the shutdown impasse. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene is also now saying the same. Is there any validity to this, and what sort of precedent would that set for a future Democrat-controlled Senate?
Well, I'd lead the House, but the Senate has its own rules. Some of them are arcane, and when you're in the minority, you don't like it a lot. The filibuster is a tradition over there that's been maintained by both parties whenever they've been in the majority for a long, long time, and they can make a very compelling case as to why that's true. Now, could you go nuclear and blow that all up and end the filibuster once and for all and allow everything for only majority party vote, 51 votes in the Senate? I mean, is it possible? Yes. Is it wise? You can have a lot of people who would tell you it's not. I mean, on the Republican side, I would be deeply concerned if the Democrats had a bare majority in the Senate right now. A Marxist ideology taking over the Democrat Party? Do I want them to have no safeguards and no stumbling blocks or hurdles at all in the way of turning us into a communist country? I don't think that's a great idea. That's me. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander, as they always say. And there are some safeguards in the process that were built in a long, long time ago to prevent one party just running roughshod. Now, there's a big contrast between what I just said and the issue that is before us today. We're not asking Chuck Schumer and the Democrats to do anything different than what they've always done. We've shown you the highlight reel. Chuck Schumer gave impassioned speeches as recently as 7 months ago in March of this year. He said, we have to keep the government open. It would be dangerous and harmful to the American people. He said after the vote, he went on CNN and said, I'm proud of that vote. I didn't like it, but we had to do that. He was right then. He is not right now. We're not asking the Democrats to do anything heroic. We're asking them to do their basic duty and responsibility, as Chairwoman McClain said. Keep the government open. The first responsibility, I'm sorry, I'm aggravated. The first responsibility of the government is to protect the people. And the people who are supposed to be protected are being completely cheated by Democrats in the Senate because they want to play politics. They hate Donald Trump. I mean, they have Trump derangement syndrome. It's very real. Listen to their own comments. And they have to show a fight at any cost. When does that cost become too high? In our view, it already has. They have another chance today to reopen the government, and we'll see if they do the right thing. I pray that they do, because real people are being affected by the games here, and they're sick of it. Thanks so much.
Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee meeting to order. The author of the great book Dune, Frank Herbert, set the table for what techno-totalitarianism looked like. Once men turned their thinking over to machines in the hope that this would set them free, but that only permitted other men with machines to enslave them. In the West, we're headed down this path towards thought crime enslavement. In the United Kingdom, 30 Brits are arrested per day for speech-related offenses. In the EU, the Digital Services Act is creating a censorship regime that would make communist China blush. In the United States, before President Trump's return to power, the American vast censorship enterprise sought to control speech, to control how we think, and to influence national discourse and elections. In 2022, as the Attorney General of Missouri, I filed the landmark lawsuit Missouri versus Biden, which Justice Alito called one of the most important First Amendment cases in American history. Though my lawsuit uncovered a vast censorship regime perpetrated by the Biden administration. I saw all the emails, I saw all the text messages, I deposed senior government officials, including Anthony Fauci. Missouri versus Biden uncovered for the American people how the Biden administration built one of the largest censorship operations in American history by working in secret through third parties, pressuring, bullying, threatening, jawboning big tech into suppressing viewpoints that they disagreed with. Jen Psaki boasted about flagging disinformation with Facebook. The Biden White House was revealed to have been back-channeling with YouTube about suppressing disfavored speech, suppressing things like the lab leak theory. White House Digital Director Rob Flaherty pressured platforms like Facebook and YouTube to censor all kinds of COVID-related speech. Joe Biden said Facebook was killing people. Last week, Chairman Cruz and the Senate Commerce Committee released a report that revealed more details about how the Biden administration, as part of this larger censorship operation, weaponized the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, into an agent of censorship pressuring big tech to police speech. The Biden administration's collusion with big tech and non-governmental organizations to censor speech infringed on the individual freedoms of millions of Americans to limit what they could say, what they could hear, and what they could read. Fortunately, President Trump won a historic victory, and on January 20th, 2025, the first day of his second presidential term, President Trump signed an executive order titled Restoring Freedom of Speech and Ending Federal Censorship. But the story of censorship does not begin and end with the federal government. Big tech was censoring long before presidential jawboning, and I imagine will continue to censor long after. Here are some instances of pre-Biden censorship. All of big tech censored the Hunter Biden laptop story. Google banned COVID skepticism. Twitter shadow banned and suspended conservatives. Facebook throttled posts from pages like The Federalist and the New York Post. Facebook flagged and removed posts questioning voter ID laws and ballot harvesting. Two of today's witnesses, Alex Berenson and Sean Davis, were direct targets of this censorship operation, and were deplatformed, shadow banned, and silenced for their viewpoints. Congress should address this problem with decisive legislative action like my Collude Act or my Censorship Accountability Act, both of which hold big tech and government censors accountable. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about what Congress and this committee can do to make sure that no American, regardless of their political leanings, ever learns that the federal government, entrusted with protecting their First Amendment rights, is actually working to undermine them behind closed doors. Our founding fathers recognized that freedom of speech is vital. Protecting it is first and foremost in the Bill of Rights. While some argued that free speech was already protected because the Constitution did not give the government power to censor, the framers went further, affirmatively restricting government intrusion. The First Amendment is the beating heart of our Constitution. Free speech is not just instrumental, but an end to itself. In the digital age, with all the peril and possibility that accompanies it, the struggle for free speech is the struggle for civilization itself. I want to thank the witnesses for being here today and look forward to their testimony. And I will, before I turn it over to the ranking member for her opening remarks, request that Chairman Cruz's opening statement be entered into the record. Without objection, Ranking Member Campbell.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to our witnesses. Thank you for joining us this morning. These issues of the media and consumers and free speech, very important issues for us to discuss. In an era where consumers are paying more, where not enough competition exists, where deals are getting done that lead to fewer choices, less local news, I do have an important question. Where is Chairman Carr? Americans are paying and spending more money on content that used to be free more than ever before. And just a few weeks ago, we witnessed a deeply troubling episode, the FCC chairman demanding ABC take immediate action against Jimmy Kimmel for tasteless remarks and saying, quote, "We can do this the easy way or the hard way," end quote. A line that Senator Cruz rightly criticized as something, quote, right out of Goodfellas, end quote. Within hours, the nation's largest ABC affiliate, Nexstar and Sinclair, announced they would preempt the show indefinitely, and shortly thereafter, ABC suspended Jimmy Kimmel Live altogether. While ABC, Nexstar, and Sinclair have since returned Mr. Kimmel to the air, that chain of events should alarm every American. Because the power of the FCC was never meant to weaponize against a president or political targets. Let me be clear, Chairman Carr does not have the authority to police speech, nor does he or the White House finds offensive. He does not have the authority to threaten license based on content decisions. And this is especially true when those same companies have mergers and licensings pending before the FCC. That is exactly the kind of political interference, chilling effect on free speech that the First Amendment was designed to prevent. We need to hold Chairman Carr accountable for these threats, and that's why I've called on us to have a hearing, and hopefully that will happen sometime in the near future. There is a need to have oversight on this, and I hope that this hearing does happen without further delay. Professor Volokh, am I saying that right, Volokh? Thank you, said in his testimony, quote, FCC Chairman Brendan Carr's statement about Jimmy Kimmel may likewise have threatened retaliation in a way that would violate the First Amendment, end quote. So the point on this, there is broad agreement. Free expression is not a partisan issue. It is the bedrock of our democracy. So this is in a long list of issues about the First Amendment. I think the president is making pretty much a standard issue. Just last week, the federal court found that the administration violated the First Amendment by arresting, detaining, and deporting non-citizen students and faculty members for their pro-Palestinian advocacy. This follows the White House revocation of the Associated Press's credentials for refusal to use the term, quote, Gulf of Mexico, clearly an attempt to police the language and intimidate free speech. Meanwhile, the administration continues to wield the full power of the federal government to retaliate against law firms the president doesn't like and threaten funding for universities he disfavors. It is alarming to see the administration use its regulatory and informal authority to unlawfully infringe on free speech, the free press, and the First Amendment. And it's important that we also understand the broader context here. That is why, Mr. Kimmelman, I'm so glad to see you here today. Local journalism in America is already under extraordinary strain. The Commerce Committee has documented how online platforms monopolize advertising, siphon revenue away from local newspapers and broadcasters, and the result has been newsroom closures, layoffs across the country, and even as the public trust in local journalism remains at an all-time high. At the same time, media consolidation has been concentrated into fewer hands. Since 2005, the U.S. has lost almost 1/3 of its newspapers. This year alone, 127 newspapers closed. Nearly 55 million Americans have limited or no access to local news, disproportionately affecting rural areas. That leaves new outlets more vulnerable to political and corporate pressures and leaves the public without further resources of getting to true competition, which I believe gets us to the truth. If Chairman Carr can threaten one network over a single late-night host and his message, what kind of message does that send to local broadcasters in Seattle or Houston? Do they lose their license if they're reporting or they're crossing the White House? This kind of intimidation undermines the very foundation of the free press. I want to be clear, protecting a free press does not mean ignoring the dangers of harmful hate speech. I've expressed concerns about companies like Facebook, Google, and X on issues that really did threaten the lives of individuals. And I know that we will hear a lot about what the Biden administration did in these areas. But let's not forget, the Supreme Court rejected allegations of the Biden administration censorship because the record showed that social media companies, quote, continued to exercise their independent judgment, end quote, and had, quote, independent incentives to moderate content, end quote. I'm sure we'll talk a lot about this. Persuading companies to enforce their own content moderation policies is not the same as threatening them with retaliation. And that is precisely what Chairman Carr did when he publicly threatened ABC, an entity over which the FCC holds direct regulatory power, to take action over the speech the administration did not like. Holding companies accountable for amplifying harm is not the same as expressing constitutional protected speech the president finds politically inconvenient. That is what we should be focusing on today, making sure the FCC as a federal agency cannot use its authority to threaten or intimidate the media, to ensure the license decisions are based on the law and not on political coercion. I hope today we can speak clearly about this and do what we can to make sure that we show that free speech is something we all agree on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look forward to hearing from the witnesses.
Thank you, Ranking Member. One point of clarification for the record, Murthy versus Missouri was not decided that way. It was sent back to lower court for additional arguments on standing, not on the merits. I would like to introduce our witnesses for today. Our first witness is Mr. Eugene Valek, a senior fellow with the Hoover Institution at Stanford University and a professor of law emeritus at UCLA School of Law. He's an expert in First Amendment law, and his writings have been cited over 300 court opinions, including 10 Supreme Court cases. Welcome. Our second witness is Mr. Alex Berenson, an author, independent journalist, and victim of the Biden administration's embargo on free speech. I look forward to hearing from Mr. Berenson and his story and what we can do to preserve speech online. Our third witness is Mr. Sean Davis, Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of The Federalist, a conservative news outlet that was subject to censorship and demonetization efforts for speaking out against the COVID-19 shutdowns. And our final witness is Mr. Gene Kimmelman, a senior policy fellow at Yale's Tobin Economic Policy Center and a senior research fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School's Center for Business and Government. And at this point would recognize Mr. Valek for your own opening statement. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for having me. This is a topic that is, I think, very important and something that I've been very interested in myself. I should also say, by sheer accident, turns out that today is 50 years to the day since my parents brought me to the United States from the then Soviet Union. So thank you to the United States of America for letting me in. Very, very glad to be here. I wanted to speak briefly about the First Amendment law on the subject, both that which is settled and that which is not entirely certain. So one thing that I think is worth noting is that the word jawboning is sometimes used in two different senses. One sense is coercion, when the government is essentially threatening someone with retaliation as a means of suppressing either that person's speech or getting that person to suppress somebody else's speech. A second one is what I call persuasion and maybe pressure short of coercion, when the government is kind of urging people, some people might say again, pressuring people to restrict, again, either their own speech or other people's speech. So the government coercion is generally unconstitutional. I think, indeed, in the remarks of Chairman Carr seem to be an attempt at coercion. Whether or not they actually caused the suspension of Jimmy Kimmel, I think they were an attempt to do something that the Constitution does not allow. Just last year, the Supreme Court found in NRA v. Vulo that the National Rifle Association had adequately alleged coercion on the part of New York government authorities aimed at trying to get insurance companies to limit ties to the NRA as a means of trying to interfere with the NRA's political advocacy. So that is pretty well settled that that's a constitutional problem. Now, what about persuasion? Well, in some situations, the government is entitled to urge entities to not speak. You can imagine a situation where a police chief calls up a newspaper and says, look, I'm not trying to coerce you. I know I can't coerce you. You can publish this article you're about to publish, but it's going to interfere with us catching the criminals. And you wouldn't want that, right? So could I just ask you, please, to do this? You know, some amount of that has got to be permissible. Or to take another example, as to misinformation, somebody calls up, a reporter says, you're about to publish this article or this op-ed, and it's just false, it's just wrong. Don't you want to be corrected on this? Again, some amount of that, it seems to me, has to be constitutionally permissible. At the same time, there is a complication because the line between coercion and persuasion is often very hard to draw. And that's particularly true when the speaker has power over the listener. The Supreme Court has most clearly recognized this in the employment context. Employers are entitled to talk to their employees, including about unionization. They're entitled to explain why they think unionizing would be a mistake. But the court has recognized that in looking at what the employer says and seeing if the employer is speaking coercively, one has to appreciate that the employee is dependent on the employer and may pick up coercive messages, even in situations where it's not express on the face of the statement. And I think the same thing is true when the government, which is a very powerful regulator, is talking to people in a regulated industry. There are times when what might sound on its face, or let's say just on the bare paper, might look like it's not coercive, may in fact in context be quite coercive. Another concern is the merger of government and private power, when it's not just kind of occasional conversations, but a systemic mechanism for trying to restrict speech. An analogy might be a few amendments down in the Fourth Amendment. If you have a roommate and you notice some evidence of crime and you call up the police can use that evidence because that's not a government search. The police didn't search for it. You did. On the other hand, if the police call you up and say, hey, you know, not trying to coerce you, but could you please rummage through your roommate's papers? That does become Fourth Amendment, a search subject to the Fourth Amendment. Precisely because it's encouraged, substantially encouraged by the police. The police become enmeshed with a private search. So that suggests that there's something similar may apply to the First Amendment. So let me just close with suggesting that this is in fact the right body to be dealing with a lot of these concerns. That some of these problems can only be solved through statutory action, through laws that maybe limit attempts at systemic persuasion and systemic suppression of speech, even if it's not technically coercive, at laws that facilitate finding information about that, and at laws that actually provide a cause of action, which the Congress has for over a century provided against state governments, but provided against the federal government as well.
Thank you very much. We'll now recognize Mr. Alex Berenson to deliver his opening statement.
Senator Schmidt, committee members, thank you for giving me the chance to speak on this crucial topic. On August 28th, 2021, Twitter, as it was then called, permanently suspended my account, supposedly for violating its COVID-19 misinformation rules. The ban deprived me of my largest and most vital platform for my journalism at a time when many Americans were eager to hear what I had to say about COVID and the mRNA vaccines and viewed what I wrote millions of times a day. Twitter's decision was no accident. It came after a deliberate and relentless campaign by the Biden administration, as well as at least one senior Pfizer board member, to violate my First Amendment rights. Led by Andrew M. Slavitt, an official in the Biden White House, the administration began pressuring Twitter to silence me almost as soon as President Biden took office, with both public and private attacks on my reporting. Frontline and senior Twitter employees viewed what was happening to me with dismay. Going back to 2020, the company had previously defended my right to speak as third parties demanded I be censored because Twitter believed that it should be a place where free speech and debate were encouraged. Ultimately, at the time of my suspension, Twitter's top executives, including then Chief Executive Jack Dorsey, secretly believed the company should not have suspended me. But the Twitter lobbyists who faced the Biden administration's pressure most directly went around them to orchestrate my ban. In the words he wrote to another Twitter official just days before he silenced me, this lobbyist hoped, quote, to keep the target off our back. None of this is speculation. Thanks to internal emails and other documents that Twitter turned over to me before Elon Musk took over, and more documents that Musk voluntarily and graciously turned over after he bought the company, I have hard proof of everything I've just told you. In fact, after I sued Twitter in December 2021 over the ban, the company admitted I had not broken its rules and that my tweets, quote, should not have led to his suspension, my suspension. The company even reinstated me in July 2022. Again, that's before Elon bought Twitter. By then, though, I'd already suffered, and so had a lot of people who were depending on my reporting to help them think about COVID vaccines and COVID lockdowns. In losing my access to Twitter, I lost my best chance to offer Americans my dissenting views on the Biden administration's COVID vaccine mandates that the Supreme Court would later strike down. Federal District Judge Jessica G.L. Clark laid out all these facts in two rulings she made this year on a 2023 lawsuit I brought against the Biden administration and senior officials at Pfizer for their censorship. In fact, in a ruling just last week, Clark noted that, quote, on the merits, the federal government has now conceded my claim that the Biden administration unconstitutionally violated my First Amendment rights in 2021. Yet in the same ruling, Clark still dismissed my lawsuit. That may sound impossible. A federal judge agreed my constitutional rights had apparently been violated, yet said my lawsuit over the violation could not move forward. But it's true. The Supreme Court has made it essentially impossible for me or anyone to win monetary damages for violations of their First Amendment rights by the federal government. As the law now stands, federal officials can run censorship campaigns like the one the Biden administration carried out against me with impunity. At worst, they may face an injunction, but they will never have to pay for doing so, for violating our most basic right, the right to speak freely. So it's open season for government censorship. This loophole is even more expansive and dangerous when it comes to federal efforts to jawbone, pressure, or outright threaten third parties like Twitter into silencing the speech of their users, employees, or business partners. That's true whether these third parties are legacy media companies, new social media giants, or other types of businesses. As a practical matter, users are generally not privy to the communications between federal officials and the companies, so they have no way of proving the pressure existed or that it led to their censorship. My case is exceptional because of the documents I have proving my rights were violated. Yet even so, I've been unable to obtain a remedy so far. And expecting companies to resist censorship on behalf of their users or business partners is unrealistic. My case, as well as documents the House has unearthed in its own censorship investigation, shows social media companies dislike the Biden administration's efforts to force them to censor users. Yet they had many other interests before the federal government. They viewed sacrificing speech as the price they had to pay to stay in the administration's good graces. Every company will face this calculus, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican in the White House. And social media companies are really the most important way that independent Americans, that citizens can get their speech out into the marketplace of debate. That's why there is so much pressure on them. The truth is that as the law now stands, federal officials have every reason to believe they can coerce private third parties to suppress speech. This is a powerful loophole that is no doubt enticing to politicians and officials of both parties, but it's wrong. Whether it affects Republicans or Democrats, journalists or comedians, conservatives or liberals or independents, and whether it goes by jawboning, coercion, pressure, or threats, this kind of censorship is wrong. And this committee has the chance to begin the process of fixing that wrong. I urge you to take it.
Thank you. We'll now recognize Sean Davis to deliver his opening statement.
It begins with censorship, it moves to the destruction of statues and monuments, and it ends with the murder of people. It begins with censorship, it moves to the destruction of statues and monuments, and it ends with the murder of people. The drive to silence speech doesn't end at a podium's edge or at the four corners of a page. It always advances toward the violent elimination of speakers. And that is because the authoritarian impulse to silence speech is driven by a totalitarian desire to seize total power by any means necessary, up to and including the murder of one's political opponents. This dynamic was made clear on a Tuesday afternoon in Utah last month when my friend Charlie Kirk was assassinated in broad daylight by a left-wing transgender ideologue who is enraged by Charlie's clear understanding and teaching that God created us male and female, that boys cannot become girls and girls cannot become boys. Charlie was murdered by this left-wing assassin who had been radicalized by demonic transgender ideology because he was one of the most bold and effective speakers in the country opposed to this evil ideology. Rather than see a nation unite against terroristic violence designed to permanently silence speech, we actually saw the opposite. We witnessed people praising the murder of Charlie. We witnessed people thanking his assassin. We even witnessed members of the United States Congress all but say that Charlie deserved it. That isn't the only recent example. The Democrat candidate for Attorney General in Virginia was revealed last week to have called for the murder of one of his political opponents. Even worse, he also said he wanted his opponent to witness the murder of his own children, to watch them die in their mother's arms. Why? To make him feel pain for having different political opinions. How many here today condemned that insanity or publicly recognized that someone with such a broken moral compass is simply unqualified to be a state's top law enforcement officer? We have heard the tired cliche that riots are the language of the unheard, but the reality is that violence is the language of the unhinged, and far too many people in this room are fluent in it. My name is Sean Davis, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of The Federalist, a conservative digital media company that focuses on politics, culture, and religion. I'm also a victim of illegal and unconstitutional censorship. My company, my colleagues, and I have been the targets of a coordinated and global multi-year censorship campaign. In 2020, a foreign government-connected outfit in the UK colluded with Google to demonetize The Federalist. Our crime? We published an article in the summer of 2020 entitled, "The Media Are Lying to You About Everything, Including the Riots." Later that year, in the midst of a close and heated presidential election campaign, government-funded efforts in the U.S. repeatedly censored Molly Hemingway, The Federalist editor-in-chief and a New York Times bestselling author who's here behind me today, and me because of our election reporting and commentary. I was censored for posting a screenshot of and a link to a Pennsylvania Supreme Court decision requiring mail-in ballots received after Election Day and lacking a postmark to be counted and presumed as valid votes. Molly was censored for posting a link to an article The Federalist published. The headline of that article, "America Won't Trust Elections Until the Voter Fraud is Investigated." But the censorship didn't stop there. We were also targeted for bankruptcy and destruction by the U.S. State Department and its Global Engagement Center, or GEC. Despite the fact that GEC was explicitly prohibited by both the U.S. Constitution via the First Amendment and its authorizing statute from targeting domestic speech, it nonetheless sought to drive us out of business by funding, developing, and distributing technologies and tools to reduce our reach, by bullying advertisers into blacklisting us and many other conservative outlets, and by coercing big tech companies like Facebook, Google, and Twitter to throttle access to our content. In essence, our own government secretly and without any due process, charged us with thought crimes, convicted us, and sentenced the Federalists to death. The censorship efforts our government funded with our money are still being wielded against us today. I'm here today to testify about the unconstitutional and illegal censorship of my company and my colleagues, but I'm also here to help you understand the real-world consequences in flesh and in blood of the drive to silence your political opposition. It doesn't stop at the page's end. The effort to censor and silence political opposition is not the final step in the effort to usher in tyranny and authoritarianism. It begins with censorship, it moves to the destruction of statues and monuments, and it ends with the murder of people, and it has to stop. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now recognize Mr. Gene Kimmelman for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator Cantwell, members of the committee. It's an honor to appear before you today. So as we've experienced this explosion in digital technology, which fundamentally is transforming our media landscape and information ecosystem, I think the fundamental principles that our democracy has always relied upon remain the same. First, we must prevent government from censoring protected speech, as Mr. Volokh said. Second, we must also prevent media and information distribution platforms from concentrating enough power to block the competition and diversity that fuels open debate in our society. I'm worried that the current FCC is heading down a dangerous path on both of these principles. Recent statements from Chairman Carr echoing the president, threatening to revoke broadcast licenses for presenting content unfavorable to the administration, has chilled protected speech. And the FCC's push to eliminate or relax broadcast ownership rules and to welcome consolidation in media threaten the independence and diversity of local media that are critical to an informed citizenry. Just consider, we have pending before us the Nexstar merger with Tegna, combining national broadcast companies with more than 250 broadcast stations, combining multiple broadcast licenses in the top markets that are the most popular broadcast television stations, and having ownership in 2/3 of all markets, covering almost 80% of all households in the country, even though this appears to violate the limit Congress set at half that level. Chairman Carr seems to be moving forward. And this is on the heels of Skydance, backed by Oracle's owner, Mr. Larry Ellison, buying Paramount Global CBS, now seeking to buy Warner Brothers Discovery, more studios, more networks, cable channels, and Mr. Ellison appearing to pick up about a 20% stake in TikTok. And the FCC is also considering allowing companies to own multiple national networks. These deals, and certainly more to follow, likely threaten to build a form of private censorship through outsized media power. It is time to update the law and establish new guardrails to promote local, diverse, and independent media. The threat to democracy also comes from the dominant information distribution systems controlled by Google, Meta with Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and Apple with its App Store. Here, the Trump administration has done an excellent job challenging these companies' monopolistic behavior, continuing the antitrust enforcement from the Biden administration. However, antitrust is not enough to eliminate the enormous power of these tech platforms. More needs to be done. Congress must give antitrust enforcers more tools to truly open up the tech information distribution platforms and modern media markets to robust competition. We need to reduce concentration of control in these markets, private control that can censor just as the government can censor. In conclusion, I want to say it is really time for Congress to update the Communications Act, to jump in and put an end to the threat of the bullying that we're seeing from the FCC, which chills speech and eliminates open debate and information flow in our media. And it's time to stop media consolidation and monopolization that puts too much control over the marketplace of ideas in too few hands. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you for testimony. And I guess I'll just start there with just a quick question. So, Mr. Kimmelman, you are the CEO of a group called Public Knowledge, is that correct?
I was at one point, sir.
Okay. What years were you the CEO of Public Knowledge?
2014 to 2019.
Okay. Okay. Let's just take a DeLorean back in time to the COVID era. What do you think it's appropriate for these sort of NGOs or nonprofits to work hand in hand with government agencies to flag misinformation or disinformation or malinformation?
Mr. Chairman, I've worked with NGOs for many, many years, and I think it's appropriate on the left, on the right, for them to present ideas to the government, to the major players in the marketplace about their views. That's what I was involved in.
Well, let me get more specific then. Do you think it's appropriate that the White House was working directly through a number of different agencies to work with the University of Washington and Stanford Information to sort of outsource their censorship enterprise to find out what the posts that they didn't like and then work with, and then collude with at least, or coerce social media companies to punish those folks?
Well, Senator, I think I've seen the government in many instances work with private contractors.
I'm asking about this instance because it wasn't like a galaxy far, far away. It was like a few years ago.
Yeah,
Do you think that's appropriate?
I'm not familiar with the details of what might or might not happen there.
But what about the scenario I just gave you, though?
Working with a university to
flag misinformation so that the government then can coerce social media companies to throttle.
I never think government should coerce social media companies, so I can't imagine that, that part of it is.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Davis, your testimony described how in the summer of 2020, Google attempted to demonetize the Federalist following your critiques of violent Black Lives Matter riots. It's documented that the Center for Countering Digital Hate, the CCDH, specifically worked to demonetize the Federalists for these critiques. Could you just describe what tactics specifically were employed to do that?
Yes, sir. Thank you for bringing that up. So I believe it was in July of 2020. We started receiving emails from NBC News reporter based out of the UK. I don't remember her name exactly. And they were almost taunting, asking for comment. Hey, Federalist, how does it feel knowing Google's is about to demonetize you for hate speech or something like that? I'm paraphrasing. And this was news to us. We hadn't broken any rules. We had gotten no notifications of breaking rules, that we had violated Google's terms and conditions or AdSense's or whatever. And so we started calling around to contacts at Google and learned that, oh yeah, you are about to be demonetized because of hate speech, was what we were told. We had racist, violent hate speech, which was not true at all. And it was the CCDH who was working with this NBC News, I think it was called the verification unit at the time. They were working together and colluding with executives at Google, to this day, I don't know who, to come in and secretly demonetize us. And what I found most offensive about it was they were all in on it. They had news articles ready to be written, kind of crowing about how we got demonetized. We were able to fight back. We had a pretty robust response to that, and they ended up relenting. Largely, what was interesting was in that initial news article targeting us, they had cited that news article, how the media are lying to you about literally everything, including the riots. The NBC News ended up stealth editing that out, and they worked with Google to come up with a new rationale for demonetizing us, which was our comments were mean. We had an unmoderated comment section. So we ended up having to delete our comment section to avoid being demonetized by Google because a bunch of foreign connected government outfits decided that they didn't like what we were publishing.
Okay. In limited time, I want to, Mr. Berenson, it's clear now that during the Biden administration, CISA, which is mentioned a lot in this report, obviously, operated kind of a switchboarding mechanism during this period, flagging disfavored content from domestic sources for social media platforms. Based on what you've seen, how was CISA specifically doing this? What was the abuse really all about?
Well, again, I think you laid it out. They redefined infrastructure. So it wasn't actual physical infrastructure or software infrastructure. It was things people were saying. And there was a period very early in 2022 when they actually tried to redefine terrorism as quote unquote misinformation. There's a bulletin from February 2022, which I think DHS put out and then retracted under pressure. So, once you start saying that people's speech is terrorism, you're going down a bad path. And I don't think that's something that either party should do, honestly.
Thanks. Ranking Member Cantwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to yield to my colleague for a second to make a statement, then I'll finish with my questions.
Thank you. I'll do my questions on the record because I have to leave, but I wasn't going to speak, and I appreciate Senator Cantwell's willingness to let me say a few words here, given what happened in my state this summer. First of all, I think Mr. Kimmelman knows that I've been out front on monopoly issues and antitrust and making sure that we have true competition in the marketplace, working with Senator Cruz and Senator Lee and Senator Kennedy and many others on that issue, and I continue to believe that it's a legitimate solution. Secondly, I think what happened with the chair of the FCC was wrong in the last month. I appreciated Senator Cruz being out front on it. I truly do, and calling it out. And I'm looking forward to that hearing to try to get some sense into what's going on there with not just the Jimmy Kimmel moment, but many others. Third, I think that the AI piece of this, and I'll ask some questions about this, but to me, it should not be that radical that we say, number one, that if speech is violent or it incites violence, that is different than other kinds of speech, but that with these AI videos where you can't even tell it's yourself or not, I had this experience at a hearing, that they could at least be labeled. It is always going to be litigation, Mr. Davis, over whether something is the violent side and the hate side or whether it is the legally, constitutionally allowed speech like parody. But at the very least, these videos should say something about prepared for by AI or digitally created. I just happened to be late on CNN last night, and Robin Williams' family was on one of the shows talking about how he's dead, and they've created AI videos that don't say digitally altered that people think are real. So people should have the right over their own identity. And the last thing, when it comes to these horrific mass shootings and acts of violence, I have come to see them as all-purpose haters, which is something that the FBI actually said after the Annunciation church shooting in Minnesota, because that shooter actually hated President Trump in the manifesto, hated wokeness, hated Jews, hated Muslims, hated Hispanics, hated blacks, and shot these two little kids, Fletcher and Harper, through stained glass windows in a Catholic church. Then you go to the shooting of my dear friend, and I had a good discussion with FBI Director Patel about this in Judiciary. He lost his friend, Charlie Kirk, and we mourn that, and we lost our friend, Melissa Hortman. That shooter literally had a manifesto or ramblings that targeted mostly, and in fact, all Democratic office holders, and he went to the houses of the people that he knew the addresses, and the ones that he didn't, he wasn't able to go to. He went after law firms, businesses, went after Planned Parenthood, and then left an actual letter saying that he did it because he was supposed to assassinate me, which is on X about every 5 minutes with my name with assassination, which I think is completely not a good idea for public safety, but I can't get it off. So the point of all this is that to say it's one side or another, when you look at the Cato Institute report that came out this year of this extremism and what's triggering these basically mad murderers to commit these acts, whether it's in the Michigan temple or whether it is Charlie Kirk in Utah, I just don't think it is the right approach to be like it's one side or the other. These people have been targeted in their heads, and they go out and create these mass crimes. And it's on us to figure out what's triggering them and to actually do something about it instead of playing the blame game. One of my answers is an assault weapon ban, or at least 21 years and under. That would have helped in Uvalde, Buffalo, Parkland, doing something about this instead of just blaming each other. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Senator Schmidt. Mr. Davis, government censorship in the name of fact-checking is an unacceptable trampling on our democratic values. Knowing what we know now, how should social media companies respond if the government comes to them to deplatform users based on their political opinions? What's your suggestion?
That's a great question. Thank you for raising it. If I could wave a magic wand and create a solution or a response there, what I would say is anytime a government goes to a social media platform, Google, YouTube, Twitter, whatever, and they tell someone you need to take this down because it's hate speech or misinformation or whatever fancy label they want to throw on speech they don't like, first off, those tech companies should tell them to take a hike. We don't censor anyone. We're a platform. We're not a content company. And then number two, I think they should have to disclose it to the public and the people who were targeted. I would love to have known in 2020 who was actually behind the censorship of me and my colleagues. We knew we were being censored because we watched it happen. We saw our posts disappear. We saw ourselves being shadow banned. We didn't actually know why. I would say to this day, we don't actually understand the full extent of the government effort to censor us. So I think there should be full disclosure following an absolute denial of any sort of censorship demands from government. It's totally inappropriate.
Thank you. Mr. Berenson, I thank you for sharing your experience of being deplatformed by Twitter. It's a valuable story for us to hear. You spoke of a huge influence that you witnessed between Twitter and the White House at the time back in 2020, and you described your understanding that the company's lobbyists hoped to keep the White House target off their back. Can you explain specifically what your understanding of that target was, and are you aware of any specific threats that were made?
Sure. So in July 2021, as the Biden administration was preparing vaccine mandates, and that's sort of what you have to understand about the backdrop here, and they knew that those might be politically unpopular, they started pressuring the companies to deplatform people like me. I mean, they'd been doing this, but they upped the pressure, and that's when President Biden said that Facebook was quote unquote killing people by allowing people like me or RFK Jr. to speak. And you know, the biggest legal protection that social media companies have is what's called Section 230, as I'm sure you know, where they're essentially immune from lawsuits from users over the decisions they make for content. So they have all the immunity of a traditional publisher to make decisions over what speech they want to carry. Did
the White House, do you have any kind of information or records? Did the White House specifically say what they would do to Twitter?
Well, so they specifically, well, they publicly said that they were going to reconsider Section 230. That was, again, in July. And they had privately said to Twitter in April, they had, based on Twitter's own records, said a really, quote unquote, a really hard question about why I was still being allowed to speak, which from my point of view and my lawyer's point of view, that all by itself was a First Amendment violation because it forced Twitter to start looking at me in a way that Twitter had not previously done. And that was in secret. And, you know, and I'll say this.
And again, there was no transparency.
No transparency.
That Mr. Davis spoke at.
Yes. So, I mean, look, I don't like what Brendan Carr did, but he did it publicly, and we can have a debate about it. What's really problematic is when the government goes in secret to these companies and targets individual users or individual categories of speech. And I think that that shouldn't be allowed. I think that both parties should agree that targeting an individual user or an individual post, as you know, if it's legal, is wrong. And nobody's ever said that I said anything illegal. And actually, I think most people now would agree that a lot of what I said has been confirmed. So I think that that's a pretty basic place to start.
Thank you. Mr. Volokh, you mentioned a reporting mechanism that might be a promising idea for companies that think the government is coercing them. Can you describe to the committee how such a mechanism might have prevented a situation that Mr. Berenson just described, and how would you structure that mechanism?
Sure. So this is the familiar line that sunlight is the best disinfectant. There may, in fact, be certain kinds of requests to remove something that might be justifiable in certain situations if they're not coercive, but they're just kind of appeal to somebody's better instincts. Maybe, maybe not. But presumably it's something that members of this committee, that other members of Congress might be interested in, that that reporters for newspapers might say, well, here's a list of all of these things that the government has been asking that people remove. Is it justifiable or not? Is it excessive? Does it show political bias? That's impossible to do if it's all essentially corporate secrets and government secrets.
Is there, I'm picking up on Senator Klobuchar's, I'm over time, can I finish? Thank you. Senator Klobuchar was saying is, you know, she's worried, as I think many of us are, with AI and things that are happening there, and at least to get a label, do any of you know, are these social media companies, any of these companies capable of doing that, to be able to identify when something's been tampered with AI, or if it's totally false, to be able to do that?
That is a separate question, but a very important question. There is what you're asking, I think, is the technical question, which is even if they were just to do it on their own, can they do it? So my understanding is that there are ways of determining that. They're hard to do at scale. So perhaps a forensic examiner might look at a video, but it doesn't mean that you can have an algorithm that will reliably do it, and there's going to be false positives and false negatives. There's also always going to be an arms race, right? If there's a better fake technology, better detector technology, better fake technology that evades the detector technology. I'm not up on all the details, but my understanding is right now there is no guaranteed reliable mechanism of determining.
Then maybe you get into the whole question also on what's comedy, what's satire, it opens up a whole another avenue then.
That's absolutely right. There certainly is no software you can write that says, oh, this is obvious parody, and therefore it shouldn't be taken down.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Professor Volokh, for both the statement you made about Brendan Carr's coercive tactics, and that wouldn't be appropriate, and for your recommendations on transparency and rules that I think would be a concept of just making sure that things were clear. And to my colleague's comment, Senator Klobuchar, one of the reasons I appreciate many things she said, but one of the reasons I support the Blackburn legislation and joined her as a co-sponsored on the Copied Act is because it gives the content holders some rights, and it shows who the content holders are, and even in the case of compensation, which is an important issue to keeping competition and perfect information. I will just note that during this debate, this committee and this body passed a public health emergency language related to deceptive practice language. It was unlawful to engage in deceptive practices related to the treatment, cure, prevention, mitigation, or diagnosis related to COVID. Why did we do that? Why did we give that extra power? Because there were a lot of crazy things online, like take bleach or what have you. And we wanted to make sure that we were protecting consumers against deceptive practices as it related to that. That was passed in a very, very big bipartisan support by by the Senate and became law. Okay, so now to this, Mr. Kimmel, this larger issue. Even my colleague from the House, who was chairman of the China committee, I see doesn't like the TikTok decision because he doesn't think it goes far enough and banning, the actual algorithm. We have this attempt by CAR to kind of realign the deck chairs at this moment that we have competition shrinking. And so that's why it's so concerning to me. And the unevenness, we had a hearing here, Facebook whistleblower who literally said the company knew that it was elevating hate speech as a way to increase the revenue for advertisers. And, I feel like that's, if a newspaper or a broadcaster puts false information in the paper, the community will respond, and that person will no longer be able to continue their business. But online, you don't even know that that's happening. And so making sure that we don't have, these challenges, what do we need to do to really get people to understand that that right now you could, in a very in a very vertical way, have such an alignment that influence that we're talking about now of not being coercive is actually done in in major ways, even as my Republican colleague in the House is saying he's concerned about this as it relates to what TikTok might be doing.
Well, Senator Cantwell, I think it's a critical issue because as the technology has changed, the entire media landscape has changed. So I think we have to update our understanding of where is the excess power being used, how is it being used. These examples you've heard today all relate to a gatekeeper in the media landscape that is a tech company. We haven't always thought of them as being part of the same ecosystem, and I think we need to do that. Because if you have such enormous power over the major ways in which the public gets news, information, can keep up about whether it's their community or if it matters of public health or national affairs, we've got to make sure that they're playing by some reasonable rules or that there's full competition in the marketplace to give people the checks and balances in the media. And that's
You don't think Professor Wallach's statement about transparency is a bad idea? It's a good idea.
No, it's a great idea. I think transparency is one element of this, but it's not enough to prevent the kinds of concerns about coercion and suppression if too few people have the megaphone, have the ability to turn on the microphone for the voices that need to be part of our public debate.
And are you worried about too much content being behind paywalls? Because I am. I'm worried that the more this vertical integration, and that's why, again, I was so concerned about Chairman Carr's comments, in addition to the free speech, that if you start using this power as the FCC chairman and you just allow for all of this vertical integration, and the next thing you know, it's kind of like on the sports issue, you put so much of it behind a paywall, you know, how is the consumer just kind of constantly being shortchanged by this whole change in the landscape?
It's a huge problem, and that's why we need to make sure there's adequate ways for the companies that really invest in news and information and gathering the information that the public wants, engaging people in public debate, can finance that and present it so it's not all dumbed down and kind of diluted in an internet where there's just such massive information flow that you can't tell fact from fiction.
You're talking about localism now.
Absolutely, it's localism, and it's preventing the few companies that seem to have amassed quite a bit of power already from getting any larger and acting as gatekeepers to our public debate.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you to all the witnesses for being here. If there's no objection, I'd like to put into the record a letter sent from this committee back in 2018 to the chairman of the FCC requesting that Sinclair Broadcasting licenses be reviewed because in the minds of the 12 Democrats, including 2 on this committee, felt that Sinclair was perpetuating misinformation. So we'll put that into the record, which I find, given the conversations around Commissioner Carr, I find that decently ironic. Mr.
Can I just make
we can do it then. You have your time. So, Mr. Wallach, you mentioned that you came to the U.S. 50 years ago. We, to this day, congratulations. I came to America a little bit more than 50 years ago, which I hate to actually say in public testimony because it makes me feel old. How many TV stations, you probably like me had to learn English watching TV. How many TV stations and news information sources were there back then?
So I do remember
the button. You have to hit the button so you can hear you.
Button. Sorry. When we came to LA, I think there were maybe 6 or 7 VHF, and then if I twiddled the antenna right, I could get like 4 or 5 UHF.
Did you listen to a lot of podcasts?
I believe that I was not allowed to listen to podcasts in 1975.
It didn't exist. It didn't exist.
Exactly.
Did you go online and get sources from online sources?
No.
Did you go on X or Facebook or Twitter? Did you open TikTok?
I did not.
Facebook, Instagram? None of that existed because I just find
better now.
I just find it interesting that my colleagues are talking about how broadcast TV and monopolism, Mr. Kimmerman, you talked about that, which I thought was just fascinating, that there's all of a sudden this lack of resources to find information when there's never been more ways to get information than there is today. But Mr. Kimmerman, I have a question for you. You're over at the Harvard School, is that correct?
At the Kennedy School, yes.
The Kennedy School? So you would agree with all of us, I think, that free speech is important. You would agree with George Washington's comment that if freedom of speech is taken away, then dumb and silent, we may be led like sheep to the slaughter. You would agree with that, right?
Certainly.
What are you doing about Harvard's F rating for free speech?
I'm a fellow at the Kennedy School. I have a very...
I mean, have you spoken to your colleagues? Have you made a protest? Have you rallied the students to say, how do we get rid of this F rating? I mean, I can't imagine Harvard students would find it objectionable to have an F in anything. What are you doing about fixing Harvard?
There's a lot of discussion I know around me about trying to make sure there's an open environment for learning.
But they have an F rating, just to be clear. They have an F rating. Harvard University has an F rating in free speech, and you're here giving us lectures on free speech. Doesn't exactly ring very hollow. Mr. Berenson, quick question for you. We need to put on the record, what was the outrageous things that you said in 2021 that got you thrown off Twitter? I mean, were you planning to overthrow the United States government? Were you creating a militia? Like, give me an example. Give me a flavor of the outrageous things that you must have said.
The tweet that got me banned from Twitter on August 28th, 2021 began, "It doesn't stop infection or transmission." Yes.
Are you saying that a mask, a cloth mask, does not stop the spread of COVID? How dare you say those kinds of outrageous comments?
I said that the mRNA vaccine did not stop infection or transmission.
And did it?
I mean, I think I might be the only person in this room who wasn't vaccinated with the mRNA vaccine, and we all got COVID.
Did the vaccine stop the
No, of course not.
So you were allowed to be wrong, but you were right. Does that make it? Now, what accountability has been in place for that? Like, who has been held accountable for this?
Well, Twitter actually admitted that they shouldn't have done that.
No, they admitted it. But what accountability? Because that cost you money. That cost you direct money in your pocketbook. What accountability has been put in place?
There's been none. I mean, more important than accountability, I didn't get to tell people what I thought. And there were, I mean, I was getting hundreds of millions of views a month. People wanted to hear what I thought, and the Biden administration didn't like it, and they forced Twitter to ban me. And I will also say it is outrageous.
So you're saying the United States government, elected officials who swore an oath to the Constitution, told private media companies to terminate your account, which cost you your money. I assume you're not naturally wealthy from 5 generations of wealth, and that you actually have to work for a living. And that ability to earn an income was taken away from you because you dared to have an opinion on a vaccine?
I regard it as more important that I wasn't able to say what I thought. The money matters less to me. And I also have to say this. Pfizer made $100 billion selling that vaccine, and Pfizer officials cooperated or collaborated with the Biden administration. It is a scandal. Yeah. Let me just say one thing. If I had been reporting on plane crashes and Boeing had colluded with the Biden administration or the Trump administration, it would be a national scandal that a Boeing official had leaned on a social media company. Yeah, totally. But Pfizer somehow got away with this.
Yeah, and her opening statement, the ranking member talked extensively about protecting free speech, but then stated she wasn't referring to hate speech. I think what maybe my colleagues mean to say is speech that they hate. That's right. Because it's hate speech is in the eye of the beholder. Would you agree, Mr. Davis?
I completely agree. Hate speech, misinformation, disinformation, they're just fancy words that people use to shut down speech they don't like.
Right. So if I say that there's only such thing as a man and a woman, that maybe when I got to the U.S. 50 plus years ago, somebody would have said, why did you say that? Like, obviously, there's only men and women. I come from a culture where our entire language is male or female, but that could be considered hate speech, right, if I say that?
It was for a long time. If you said that on Twitter for several years, you ran the risk of being censored, shadow banned, or permanently suspended.
Well, obviously, we'll talk more about this topic. I do find it interesting that my colleagues who were totally and completely complicit during the Biden era, that were absolutely applauding people being thrown off social media, that were saying that any commentary about a Hunter Biden laptop story being misinformation was considered an insurrectionist, that now all of a sudden clutch their pearls because a moronic second-rate comedian who makes $16 million a year got fired from his job for having atrocious ratings is somehow now an attack on free speech. I don't know that they have the moral high ground here, but thank you for your testimony, and I recognize Senator from Nevada.
Thank you. Thank you for being here today and speaking your mind. It's about the First Amendment. Appreciate that. Because the freedom to express yourself and speak your mind is the cornerstone of America. It's one of the main ways we distinguish ourselves from other nations. In the United States, you are free to criticize whomever you want, including government leaders, without government censorship. And so it is wholly appropriate and indeed necessary for this committee to hold oversight hearings that focus on protecting this critical right from being eroded by anyone. But that is not the focus of today's hearing. Rather than providing us with a forum that will evaluate truly harmful government censorship, this has become increasingly commonplace under the Trump administration. We're undertaking an effort to settle old political scores against an administration that is no longer in power. There are issues that we have to deal with, and we do want to support, and we must support free speech. But this hearing is not the place. 2 weeks ago, I sent a letter to Chairman Cruz calling for the FCC chairman to testify before this committee after he threatened to revoke broadcast licenses over Jimmy Kimmel's comments criticizing President Trump. I was particularly concerned, as I know the chair was from his statements calling the threat mafia-like. Chairman Cruz called the threats mafia-like. With this clear attempt to suppress speech, comedian. However, I'm disappointed that that's not what's the focus of today's hearing. Chairman Carr's later backtracking, claiming there's some sort of local community exception to the First Amendment. There's no exceptions. You have free speech or you don't. We know those limits. There's precedent for that. His comments, Chairman Carr's, were reprehensible, and his demands of full accountability. And we demand full accountability. Indeed, his weak excuses have been repeatedly contradicted by the president's own statements. President Trump has said outright that the reason the FCC should revoke broadcast licenses is because of negative coverage of his administration. I want there to be journalism that looks at things. This is the clearest possible violation of the First Amendment. The President of the United States directing an agency to revoke a license of networks that run a critical story of him? There never would have been press or print or TV or radio. You could go back 250 years if all presidents did this. This is government censorship by our president, plain and simple. It's what they do in Russia. It's what they do in North Korea. It's what they do in China. It is not what we do in a democracy that has a First Amendment. Those attacks on free speech, they harm not only our democracy, but our economy. Last month, it was Brendan Carr's interference in the private business